Hey, welcome back, everyone. Well, I want to go into today how federal agencies are creating a censorship list of tech platforms, of news outlets, and how it's basically government, private industry working together with big tech companies to create a bad list and a good list of media. And guess who's on it? Well, Epoch Times, of course, is on the bad list. It's pretty shocking, actually, seeing that the government has been creating essentially a database of websites that they deem to be, dangerous or something like this, and frankly, to see us on it, it's quite concerning. The interesting thing too is that it's most of the conservative media that are on the list, suggesting this is actually more about politics and less about actual disinformation or whatever else. And the things they're going after these news outlets for specifically are like questioning the integrity of elections. I'm not even joking. So I'm going to go into that. Also, the United Nations, one of their top representatives, has declared that we own the science, as in they own the science, questioning whether it's actually science at this point. But first, folks, I want to go into some breaking news. Big story just came out when it comes to the elections and what's been going on with the elections. Eugene Yu, the individual who was called out by True the Vote, has been arrested on charges that he was storing data on election, poll workers on servers in China. They say it was a breach of contract, and they're accusing him basically of stealing personal information. This is what True the Vote accused him of, and he sued them. And now he's arrested. This is a pretty significant story. I'm going to talk about what's happening with that. I also want to give some background on what's happening with True the Vote because the story is bizarre. The story is bizarre to say the least. And I'll get into it in a minute, but True the Vote, they said they were actually working with the FBI initially to investigate this. They stumbled across the information. They were working with the FBI. Then they heard the FBI was targeting them instead of this organization that they claim was putting people's personal data on election workers in China, on Chinese servers. That was the claim, at least. That said, folks, let's jump into the first story. Let's get into it. Real quick, remember, too, the border special feature is now published. It's now online. If you haven't seen it yet, it's on the Crossroads channel on Epic TV. Go watch it, and please share it. Help us get the word out. That special feature can change the narrative on the border. This can change the narrative on how we talk about what's happening at the border, because it is not some grassroots organic thing. It's not just random groups of hundreds of thousands of people lining up to come to the United States. It is the United Nations running the operation and American taxpayers paying for it without you being told you're paying for it. It's significant. So check it out if you haven't already and help us spread it also. All right, that said, let's jump into the first story. I want to talk about what's happening with this True the Vote story, and I'll start with the New York Times. Now, the funny thing with the New York Times, they published this article like the day after the journalist who wrote this article wrote a piece claiming the whole thing was basically disinformation. So New York Times comes out and says, "Oh, it's all fake, nothing to see, nothing to see here." And then they have to write the article saying, "Oh yeah, the guy actually was just arrested because it happened late last night." Let me show you what New York Times is saying. They say election software executive arrested on suspicion of theft. The executive Eugene Yu and his firm, Konnech, Konnech, remember that name, have been a focus of attention among election deniers. Funny how they have a slogan for it now, election deniers, from the organization that was full of election deniers all through 2016 to about 2020, right? It was the other side before, right? Now it says, top executive of an elections technology company that has been focus of attention among election deniers was arrested by Los Angeles County officials in connection with an investigation into the possible theft of personal information about poll workers, the county said on Tuesday. Eugene Yu, the founder and executive chief of Konnech, the technology company, was taken into custody on suspicion of theft. The Los Angeles County District Attorney, George Gascon, said in a statement. Now, briefly, when I first read this, I said, it's interesting he got arrested, But why is George Gascon the one running the arrest, running the whole thing against Eugene Yu? George Gascon is like to the left of Soros. I can't imagine why he would be interested in going after anything related to election, possible problems with the elections. Maybe he had a change of heart and he decided that people's personal data on elections being stored on Chinese servers, which is the allegation. Maybe he now thinks that's something that he should look into, or maybe it's something else. We don't know yet. But this is a very radical district attorney. So it's interesting that he's the one who actually brought the charges against Eugene Yu. Again, we'll see how it unfolds, but his involvement is interesting. Now it says Konek, which is based in Michigan, and they're trying to extradite him to California now, developed software to manage election logistics. Get this, the software from this company. It develops software to manage election logistics, kind of like the ins and out of moving things around and so on, like scheduling poll workers, for example. Now, Los Angeles County is among its customers. The company has been accused by groups challenging the validity of the 2020 presidential election with storing information about poll workers on servers in China. The company has repeatedly denied keeping data outside the United States, including in recent statements to the New York Times. Mr. Gascon's office, a district attorney, said its investigators had found data stored in China. Which is interesting. The radical district attorney was looking into this. I mean, good for him. And he said that his investigators did find that this company, Konek, was storing data in China. I'll get into the ins and outs of kind of the more fine details, because actually I've been talking to True the Vote about some of the details of this, and I can give you kind of a rundown on what's been happening behind the scenes. But let's go over this all first. So, basically he's facing charges for what they were denying, Konek was denying, and facing charges for the thing that he tried suing, or did, file a lawsuit, tried to sue True the Vote over. Again, innocent till proven guilty. We'll see what comes out in the trials, but this is where things are at right now. Now, it says the company has repeatedly denied keeping the data. Again, the investigators say they did find the data stored in China, and holding the data there would violate Konek's contract with the county, Los Angeles County. The county released few other details about its investigation, but it said in its statement that the charges related only to data about poll workers, and that, quote, the alleged conduct had no impact on the tabulation of votes and did not alter election results. Now, it's funny they keep making this note. It's disinformation to claim that Konek was altering the election results or tabulation. That was never the accusation, actually. If you actually go into what True the Vote was saying, they were not accusing the company of altering tabulation or votes, which is really strange that New York Times keeps trying to harp on that narrative, because that was never the argument. This is what you see a lot of these outlets do. Either, I don't know if they do it because they don't actually read the content of what people are saying, or if they just try to. There's a diversion strategy with this, and let me explain some of it. You see it done with the Chinese Communist Party a lot. The United Nations does it all the time, where when they're facing accusations, they will claim that to debunk the accusations by debunking something totally unrelated to what the accusations are. So, for example, in this case, True the Vote was accusing Konek of storing data in China, storing personal information on poll workers in China. And they were noting that's a serious issue, because if the data is stored in China under Chinese Communist Party law, all that data would be accessible by the CCP. Keep in mind that's one of the reasons why TikTok is so controversial, is because your personal data being stored on Chinese servers, which is what they were being accused of, is a security risk, because Chinese law would require the government to have access to that data. If the CCP can access that data, it means they can target those poll workers. It means they can even manipulate the data, possibly, because if it's on their servers, they can alter it. Under Chinese law, data not only needs to be available, but also controllable by the CCP. That was the accusation. And New York Times comes out in claiming that the accusation is somehow the alteration of tabulation and so on. It's this kind of diversion tactic, and I don't know. Again, I don't know if they do that intentionally because they're trying to debunk something that's not even part of the accusation. they're trying to make people look like they're, conspiracy theorists or whatever else, or whether they do it just because they don't properly read the accusations or, read the content of arguments. I don't know which it is. But that being said, let me show you quickly what True the Vote is saying, and then I want to go into some of the background of this because it's important, and it's a really crazy story actually. Like True the Vote's story with this is out of this world. Really, what's happening with Konek and this company with Eugene Yu is one part of it. But I'd say almost as big as this, if not bigger, is the fact that the FBI began targeting True the Vote, trying to go after True the Vote. It's a bizarre story, but let me show you what True the Vote is saying. Now, True the Vote said this in a statement last night. They said, True the Vote issues statement regarding the arrest of Konek CEO Eugene Yu. This is their website. It says, True the Vote is honored to have played a small role in what must have been a wide-ranging and complex investigation. The organization is profoundly grateful to the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office for their thorough work and rapid action in this matter. True the Vote was sued last month by Konek to try to silence our organization, including obtaining ex parte TRO, conducted in secret so that True the Vote had no opportunity to contest it. This TRO limited True the Vote's ability to speak on the litigation. In other words, part of the lawsuit, they make it so that True the Vote couldn't really talk about the data, and so they put a muzzle on them through the use of the lawsuit, essentially. Today, Konek CEO, they're saying, Eugene Yu was arrested based on alleged evidence of the very activities he and his organizations attempted to suppress. The very thing that True the Vote was accusing him of, the very thing that the lawsuit was over, and the very thing that True the Vote was not allowed to speak about because of the lawsuit is the basis of Eugene Yu's arrest. In other words, everything they said essentially was the basis of this guy being arrested. They say Konek was assisted by many reporters who unblinkingly accepted their now discredited claims as fact and simply repeated them, which he did see. Most of the left-wing establishment media got behind the fake New York Times reporting on this. And we can say fake at this point because, frankly, the current arrest and claims from the district attorney's office in California discredit them. Now, are we going to call them election deniers? Are we going to call them disinformation outlets who spread information without evidence? I think is their favorite phrase. Maybe not, but basically that's what they did. Now, they say, according to True the Vote founder Catherine Engelbright, quote, election integrity should not be a partisan issue, nor should media try to suppress all conversation about it in a way that benefits one party. We will continue to report evidence of threats to our election process and work with law enforcement to ensure our elections are a secure space for all American voters. Now, briefly, those of you not familiar with True the Vote, that was the main group that Dinesh D'Souza used in his documentary as kind of the main researchers. These folks do some really incredible work actually when it comes to this. Now, before I go into the background of what's been happening with True the Vote and the FBI and their whole story, real quick, folks, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, inflation is at its highest levels in 40 years. Interest rates are skyrocketing, and a recession now looms ahead of us. Caught between runaway inflation and a recession, our retirement accounts are in real danger. If you want to protect your future, you can call American Hartford Gold. They can show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your portfolio with physical gold and silver. All it takes to get started is a short phone call, and they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or into your IRA or 401k. And they make it easy as well. They have an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied clients. If you call them right now, they'll give you up to $2,500 of free silver in your first qualifying order and a free safe. So don't wait. Call them now. That's 877-260-2764. Again, 877-260-2764. Or you can text Joshua to 65532. And big thanks out to American Hartford Gold, sponsored today's episode. Gold and silver especially tends to be a decently stable asset, just on a side note, especially when you're dealing with inflation and so on, and financial manipulation. One of the reasons why Chinese corrupt officials try to get their money out of the country, and they either put it into hard assets like diamonds or gold or so on, or they try to buy like real estate. It's interesting. Because, again, if a currency collapses, typically gold and silver remain stable. All right, folks, that said, let's go further into this, because I want to talk about some of the background with True the Vote and what they've been going through with Koenig and the FBI. Now, True the Vote actually had an event in Arizona. It was called The Pit. I attended it, and during that event, they presented a lot of their evidence. They announced a lot of new programs and so on. Now, during that event is where they announced some of their research on Eugene Yu and Koenig. And it was actually very interesting. It was a whole day event. I was there the entire day. And what they alleged, aside from what we just talked about, this idea that, again, the accusation that Koenig was storing data on American poll workers on Chinese servers. Aside from that, this is the story. True the Vote had actually been working alongside the FBI with this. Basically, that they were looking into a company that had election software that was being provided for free in some cases, and that was a red flag to them, because how does a company just provide a free product? And typically, if the product's free, they suspect that maybe there's got to be some kind of money making element or some kind of interest there. They began looking into it, and through that research, got to Koenig. And Koenig is one of the organizations that provides a lot of software for elections across the country, and actually other things as well. They checked out the server data. They said they typed in the server, and they said the server essentially was just open. It was an open server, and they claimed that on that they were able to see, where the data was and so on. And they claimed they found all this personal identifying information, POI. POI, which you can't legally have. You can't take that kind of data. It's actually really, really legally sensitive. And they claimed that data was all being stored in a Chinese server. They went even further than this by claiming they could prove that the Chinese Communist Party had essentially a line to access this data. I don't think they accused Koenig of having involvement in that. But if you understand Chinese servers and Chinese Communist Party data laws, the CCP, just in terms of its own laws, would require that kind of access. In other words, that they would always have a back door into it, whether the company is intending to do that or not, which is the reason why it's such a big issue to store data, personal data, on Chinese servers. That was their claim. Now, they claimed they were working alongside the FBI with this. The investigation was pretty far along. It seemed to be pretty significant. Then suddenly, they claimed the FBI turned against them. And the FBI began targeting specifically not Catherine Engelbright, but Greg Phillips, who's also True the Vote, the guy with the big beard you might remember from Dinesh D'Souza's documentary. Serious stuff, right? They claim the FBI starts targeting him. And they're accusing them of stealing this personal identifying information. And then they claim they had to alert Koenig, claiming that of course, True the Vote, they claimed that True the Vote had breached Koenig servers. Now, they said the order came from higher up, and essentially the lower down FBI agents were shocked by this. They were like, they couldn't believe it was happening. True the Vote then basically went on the defense. They were then being subject to an investigation by the FBI for uncovering what they believed was a major risk to our election system. A major, serious, I think, real danger to the integrity of these individuals whose data was being stored, they claimed, on Chinese servers. They were concerned about it, and then they were then subject to the investigation. FBI claimed they had to alert Koenig, and then basically True the Vote took the nuclear option, they said, and decided to go public with it. Hence, they held their event, The Pit, in Arizona. They called it The Pit as more of a biblical reference, that the evil would be tossed into the pit in the end days. That was the reference to it. And they believe that essentially, they're a group that exposes election fraud and issues with election integrity. And so for them, this is a very big deal. I think most people, it's a big deal. Now, after they were targeted by the FBI, after they went public with it, they made all their information public. They provided a lot of the, of course, documents to anybody who wanted it. Then they got sued by Koenig, and it's not clear whether the FBI is still investigating them or not. But interestingly now, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office seemed to have taken their claims seriously after a lot of the legacy news outlets and big corporate media had a field day making false claims and trying to write the whole thing off, including New York Times writing false claims and trying to write the whole thing off. Then the guy's arrested, and then these news outlets try to cover the whole thing up by claiming they reported it and just trying to write off everything they said, questioning it. It's very, very bizarre stuff. We'll see now if the FBI still goes after True the Vote, though. Because now that, if Eugene Yu is arrested, that's pretty serious, and it does suggest that the investigations True the Vote did on this were at least valid and deserving of public attention, that they, of course, uncovered what could be a crime. Of course, we will see how the trial goes. In America, you are innocent until proven guilty. We do not have the Napoleonic system where you're guilty until proven innocent. We'll see where it goes. But again, this is where things are at. That said, folks, I'm going to go into some more stuff. Let's talk now about what's happening. Again, I'll keep you updated on the True the Vote thing and with Eugene Yu. We'll see where it goes. But again, this is pretty serious. The only kind of red flag for me is the fact that, I don't know, maybe the district attorney in LA had a change of heart, but this district attorney is pretty far left. And generally speaking, folks on the far left tend to not want to investigate any kind of alleged election fraud or issues with the election system, unless it's, loosening the integrity of the election system. Maybe it is of serious concern to them that data is being stored in China. Maybe this is legitimate, but I do find it a bit interesting, actually, that it was this Attorney General in particular who chose to investigate and bring the charges. But again, we'll see how this goes. All right, folks. That said, let's jump into what's happening with this. I want to talk about what's happening with the federal government right now working with big tech companies to target independent media and also right-leaning media. Basically, it turns out the federal government had a program cooperating with several organizations and big tech companies like Facebook and so on to try to target news outlets on the right wing of politics, conservative politics, to target them under allegations of spreading false information. It's almost exclusively conservative news outlets that are being targeted, and they're not going after the other side. It's very bizarre, and let me show you what's been uncovered with this. Just the News had this story. They call it an enemies list. They say enemies list. Fed-backed censorship machine targeted 20 news sites. And it says the private consortium that reported election misinformation, right? This private organization, private with the big quote unquote, private organization that reported election misinformation, that's what they called it at least, to tech platforms during the 2020 election season, in consultation with federal agencies, targeted several news organizations in its dragnet. It says websites for Just the News, New York Post, Fox News, Washington Examiner, Washington Times, Epoch Times, meaning folks like me, and Breitbart were identified among the 20, quote, most prominent domains across election integrity incidents. They were cited in tweets flagged by the Election Integrity Partnership and its collaborators. In other words, anybody who is questioning voter fraud or issues with the elections, any journalist who was questioning it was being flagged by this organization. And this organization was working hand in glove with the U.S. government to go to big tech platforms to encourage them to censor these journalists. Really, imagine if during the 2016 elections, when the Democrats and most of the establishment corporate media, the big corporate media, when they were the ones claiming Trump, rigged the election, Trump colluded with Russia, Trump hired hookers to pee on Obama's bed in Russia. Remember that? It was all fake. But imagine if the Trump administration created a system where the federal government was working with like private right-wing companies, and these right-wing companies were giving lists of journalists on the big corporate media to censor. They would freak out. They would melt. They would have meltdowns. You'd have people protesting on the street and like lighting themselves on fire in the White House lawn, which they did do, by the way. You would have craziness like this. I mean, absolute pandemonium. They would claim that Trump is, the new Hitler, that he was mobilizing the government to go after free speech. They'd call it the book burning and so on. And what do they have here? It's like nothing, other than, of course, conservatives being unhappy about this. Now, it says the Washington Post, New York Times, and CNN also appeared on the list because, again, these are left-wing media, but the consortium's after-action report emphasizes that most of the mainstream media reports, i.e. read mainstream media as big corporate media, quote, were referenced as fact-checkers that played a corrective role against, quote, misleading narratives. So they framed all the folks on their side as, playing a corrective role. They were correcting the incorrect information. Incorrect information that proved to be true, by the way, but maybe politically incorrect is what they mean. Now, the report also identified the 21, quote, most prominent repeat spreaders of misinformation on Twitter, and all of them politically classified as right. The group, these are individuals they were labeling and putting on their naughty list. That's actor James Wood. They had James Wood at the head of the group, followed by Gateway Pundit and Blog, followed by Donald Trump Jr. and President Donald Trump himself. The report emphasized 15 were verified by Twitter. Now, further in it says the Stanford Internet Observatory, University of Washington Center for Informed Public, think tank Atlantic Council, which is one of the furthest left organizations there is, and social media analytics from Graphica claim their consortium had a 35% success rate getting flagged content removed, throttled, or labeled. In other words, all these media outlets that were talking about election, issues, election fraud or election integrity issues, all the individuals warning about election fraud, it says here that 35% of any content of theirs that was flagged by this consortium working hand in glove with the government, 35% of that content was removed, throttled, meaning they reduced its spread, or labeled. Interestingly, Crossroads, our YouTube channel, got frozen and demonetized and just basically shut down. Everything other than being closed down entirely right after January 6th. And so, they went after us really hard. To this day, they never actually told us the justification for that. They never actually told us what we did that violated the terms of service. They actually froze simultaneously all of the Epoch Times accounts on YouTube, and also demonetized us. I think only like Roman's show was, I think, the only one they didn't demonetize, interestingly. But, just again, that I've seen it firsthand, and again, we're on the list. They have us on their list. It says the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the State Department, and liberal groups such as the Democratic National Committee also flagged purported information through the consortium. Folks, let that sink in. Imagine if, again, you had a right-wing group of, so they say think tanks and organizations instead of the Atlantic Council, maybe it's like Heritage Foundation or something like that, and they're working with the Trump, imagine they were working with the Trump administration, and you had the Trump administration using the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, and instead of the Democratic National Committee, it was like the GOP, the Republican Party. Imagine if the Republican Party working together with the Trump administration, working together with the State Department and Department of Homeland Security, and all these big tech platforms were going around and just censoring all the left-wing media. Like, imagine if that happened. That is exactly what they did, only the sides are flipped. That's exactly what they did. Sorry, real quick, yeah, so Roman's channel was demonetized, but it wasn't frozen, just briefly on that. Now, back to this, though. So the list they have includes a list as well of repeat spreaders of election misinformation on Twitter. And there's more information on the group that's behind the private-public censorship system. Let me show you more information on the group running the whole show behind this. Now, actually, before we go into that, let's jump over to Epoch TV because I don't know. Maybe YouTube will. We're walking on glass with this one. We're walking on thin ice with this episode because everything from election integrity to true the vote stuff is strike territory for YouTube. Unfortunately, actually, YouTube. Remember, they without warning. All right, very bizarre, folks. I apologize that we've been having weird issues lately. All right, we back on. Dang, I apologize for that. I don't know what happened. You know, funny. It's been odd today and yesterday. We've been having issues. I apologize for that, folks. Yeah, you know, we're trying to fix it. We're trying to figure out what the cause is, but there's been some weird issues with our connections lately, and I don't know what's causing it. We're trying to troubleshoot it. I apologize for that. That said, folks, let's jump over to Epoch TV exclusively, and I'm gonna go deeper into what's happening with all of this. Before we jump over, though, let me show the trailer of the border feature I did. And again, if you haven't seen it yet, check it out. And if you've seen it, please help spread it. This will change the narrative on the border. This will change the narrative. Let me show you this trailer. What use is a wall if the migrant crisis is being facilitated by the United Nations working with NGOs?
Many of the people that can't get visas to come, like, start off in Mexico, they start in South America.
Is this a coordinated effort? And if so, what's the motive?
Families coming across claiming asylum because they had children, but there was the same children every week. They started testing DNA to make sure that the children were in fact children of the parents. 30% weren't.
What's really happening at the U.S.-Mexico border?
These are all human smuggling cases from the past couple of weeks.
What caused the U.S. policy shift from mass immigration? And folks, again, that's currently on Epoch TV. If you haven't seen it yet, please watch it. Basically, again, this is about how the United Nations is running this operation and how American taxpayers through the State Department are financing it. It is shocking. I did not anticipate finding that. But again, I explain the whole thing in the feature. Please check it out. Again, that's on Epoch TV. All right, that said, folks, let's jump over exclusively to Epoch TV, where they're not going to delete our channel. And I'll see you there. So, all right.